what happens when you draw lines on pieces of land where people may not belong. Well, so government debt is probably one of the biggest asset classes in the world. You have to own your real estate. If you don't own your building, you're creating value for someone else. Am I a real estate company? Am I a hospitality company? Or am I a startup community? Or am I a venture capitalist?
Interesting.
Because these are 4 different businesses. Those who are good at this thing are not good at this thing. Because they're 2 completely different skill sets. If you don't own the real estate, don't go in there and put in $10 million to put plants and couches. I didn't know what business I was in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I appreciate it. I've completely lost count. I'm just extremely glad to have you here, kind of like Vikram. God, please take us back. I think there's so much that you've been building over the course of your life that I feel like a lot of the people in my circles, I don't hear them referencing or talking kind of about enough. So I'm really interested to dig into everything that you've been doing. But do you want to take us back to the beginning, Vikram? Where did you start? Where are you from?
Sure. So my interest is in how societies work, and I think this interest came about because I'm a product of civil unrest. I was born in a place called Nagaland, which is the northeast of India, and it's right on the Burmese border. And the people there are look and feel very different from the rest of India because they have a different history and religion and culture. Um, and when the British left, they sort of drew a line on the border to say you're now part of India. And so there was a lot of unrest because they didn't really want to be part of this country, this newly minted country. And my father was from the other side of the border, and he worked for the government, and he was in charge of connecting this new place to the central government. And so I was for when I was young, very involved in seeing what happens when you draw lines on pieces of land where people may not belong. And so that really got me interested in how societies work around the world. So that's, I think, my core interest. And so for the last 10 years, I've been building companies in the intersection of that and business in general. I have 3 companies that I focus on. One is called Draper Startup House, and we've been building startup societies all around the world since 2018. So it's been 6 or 7 years. The other company is Draper Startup House Ventures, which is a small micro venture fund, and we invest in companies around the world. And the third company is called Draper Nation, which is building infrastructure for freedom. And we're building all sorts of tools that are necessary and practical for what people need today.
It sounds like there's a lot there to dig into, is the main point, right? But before we do and dive into all the work you're doing with Draper, like, again, a bit more about your story, right? So you started with a really interesting kind of like moment, or again, where you were born and this line being drawn down the map artificially. Like, how did that actually affect your childhood? And I guess, like, when did you leave home? Where did where was university? Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So my father married a tribal woman to get into the society, and that was the way you actually integrated with the society as an outsider. And I left when I was very young. I grew up in California. I grew up in Los Angeles, and that's where I spent most of my adult life. Went to school there, and 10 years ago, I moved to Singapore, where I live now. I have 3 children that were born, all born in Singapore. And I left the United States because even though I'm an American and I've lived there most of my life, I wanted to experience what it's like to live in other parts of the world.
Sure.
And so for me, Singapore was the most attractive place to be for the long term. So This is where this is where across the bridge is where I live, and I still find it to be a very fascinating place to live.
And you were in finance first, if I'm sort of like correct. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. I started my career at JP Morgan, and I was there for a very long time. And then I left to travel the world for 2 years, and I traveled to 60 countries, and then sort of settled down in Singapore.
Was there any connection with the work that you were doing at JP Morgan to what you're doing now? What was day to day at JPM?
Actually, there's a lot of connection because at one point at JP Morgan, I worked in municipal debt.
Okay, sure.
And so we were selling,
Interesting.
we were working with municipalities and working on financing cities and projects for governments. And so I got to experience what it's like to raise money for governments and then selling financing to consumers who finance the government projects.
Yeah.
And so now that I'm in the new government space, I think it's very practical to sort of have that knowledge base.
No, super interesting. Like, I love. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Or like, for example, like, what would be the difference in you sort of like raising debt for a municipal bond versus like a corporate bond or something like? Well, tell us a bit more about what that would look like actually trying to get that money for the cities.
Well, so government debt is probably one of the biggest asset classes in the world. And I had the, I would say I was kind of lucky to work on some parts of government debt during the financial crisis. And so to see the Greek bonds markets fall apart and sort of see the underlying financing of governments is actually a little bit of a paper tiger. Um, it is probably the biggest risk to the world today is a level of government debt all over the world. And very likely that's going to implode. And so sort of understanding the government debt markets is is something I think that we should all know. How is it different from corporate? I mean, there's a lot of similarities, except I think governments have the ability to print money. And so the balance sheets, surely are much, much larger.
No, it's super interesting. Who were the main buyers? Were you sort of sales on that side at JPM on the municipal bonds? Like, who were the buyers of that debt?
Buyers are generally large institutions,
Yep.
pension funds, and then they go out and sell to consumers. But generally, it would be school districts and people who have large pension funds.
No, very interesting. But okay, so did your time in the city, that went well. Took 2 years to work out, or just to go and live around live around the world. And then what happened? Why did you stop that? What were you doing in those 2 years, and what came next?
Yeah, so the 2 years I spent traveling around the world, I was doing solo backpacking, and I fell in love with the whole backpacking culture. And I had stayed in backpacker spaces all around the world, from Argentina to Korea to Sydney to Sweden. And I sort of really fell into I started working in the spaces and realized that these small communities are so vibrant, but there's one thing missing, which was maybe a little bit of the business aspect. And I felt like there was a way to create those spaces with a business element to it, or a skills learning element to it. And so that's what we call the startup house. And so when I moved to Singapore, I was running a fund for a Japanese family. And I pitched them the idea that there could be an opportunity to create a new hospitality class called the startup house, which would be a commercial asset class where you would take, like the backpacker hostels or the hacker houses, and create a commercial element of that can be scaled across the world. And they loved the idea, and so I started the first one in Singapore, which was very successful. And then we launched in Indonesia, and then we launched in India. And when we had 3 or 4 of these houses, one day I got a call from Tim Draper, who has a startup school in California. And he was interested in what we're doing, and we ended up sort of folding into his umbrella We rebranded and raised investment, and then we ended up scaling the startup houses to like 30 countries. Before then, it came back down.
I mean, there's like a ton to unpack there, right? So again, you created something that worked in the first place, right? You were quite quickly able to scale from Singapore to a few, which caught the attention of Tim and sort of his team. It's like, what had you cracked in that early model, you know?
Yeah, so the early model where I saw a gap was the following. I saw hacker houses around the world. So like California had a bunch of hacker houses. And what these hacker houses were very informal. So there were a bunch of friends that would have a house, and they would bring their friends and they would live there. And that was a very informal hacker house. And there was no formal hacker house in the sense that there was a licensing, they were licensed, and there was a real commercial space, etc. They were all independent hacker homes, which is sort of the ethos anyways. But I saw that there was an opportunity to really commercialize that space where you could have institutional money coming in to build a new type of a hospitality vertical, which takes hospitality plus education plus venture capital and puts it together. I know Dave was talking about this, and I was sort of really admiring the talk because he's completely right. There's a huge opportunity to marry real estate with education and with venture capital. And that's what we've been doing for the last 8 years. And of the 100 things we did, maybe 98 of those things were mistakes. But there's a couple of things that really worked and are working today. So for instance, in Bangalore, in India, or in Hyderabad, we have huge startup houses that are working. The business model works, the economics works, the concept works, the vibe, it all sort of works. Though that concept didn't work in Argentina, it didn't work in Chile, it didn't work in Kenya, it didn't work in Bali. It didn't. So there's a lot of places where it didn't work, but for some reason there's a few countries where it actually worked.
It's very, very interesting. And I guess that worked to an extent that what Tim just gave you a call? Like what happened in the beginning?
Well, so what happened was one of Tim's friends, his son had stayed in one of these startup houses.
Okay.
And Tim was at a Super Bowl party, and his friend told him, hey, my son was sort of traveling around the world and stayed in one of these startup houses. And so I think that's how he first got aware of what we were doing, and then he got in touch with me.
Yeah, and again, they already had the sort of like the school running in. Is it Sacramento or
it was Cemetery,
right? And so I guess that you were already building something which fit in a thesis that he sort of like had, and then it was like quite a. I mean, how did that deal come together? How did you end up? Was it was it like an acquisition of sorts into that, or like a merger of some description into the Draper kind of like family? Like how did that work?
Yeah, so I think the thing that Tim really liked about what we were doing was we had identified an opportunity, and we had identified the problem. The problem was the hacker homes were independent, fragmented, and no one had really tried to commercialize that space. And so that was the opportunity, was to commercialize the space. And maybe people had tried it, but no one had really sort of succeeded in commercializing the space. And I think the reason maybe for that was people hadn't really understood that you could actually have a building where you could have startups working, living, networking, getting invested in one building as a commercial proposition. I don't know if people had actually tried to do that. And that's what sort of we were trying to do. And I think he saw the opportunity in being able to create a commercial proposition that can be licensed, that can be franchised. And I think that, so by the way, that opportunity still exists today. I mean, an example of what you guys are doing here is something that could be commercialized, licensed and franchised across the world if you get your first model, first and second models like really well done and scripted so that it can be replicated.
And then you did, I mean, that deal happened, and then you blitz scaled it.
We went too fast, too hard, and that was not a good idea.
So tell me about that. You were like 4 sites and you scaled up to 30. And so maybe talk a little bit about that
Yeah,
journey.
we ended up going to very adventurous places because I think our DNA is to go to not to Berlin or London,
Yep.
but to go to Georgia and to go to more adventurous places.
Sure.
We tried all sorts of real estate models, from ownership to management to just operating spaces, and to doing construction. So we tried all the models, and we didn't have a real estate background, so we essentially just threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. And with real estate, you can't really throw spaghetti at the wall because you end up really losing money. And I think we were trying to take the startup mentality to real estate, which somehow doesn't really, I think real estate is a proven sort of model where you have to do it in a very methodical and traditional manner.
Hmm.
I don't, I'm not sure if real estate can be done in a sort of a in in a vibe model or in a experimental model, unless you have the balance sheet to do it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the wall kind of, you need to know it's going to stand up when you build it, right? Like there are these things in the physical world, they sort of have to work, right?
Yeah, yeah, and things like very simple things like you have to own your real estate. If you don't own your building, you're creating value for someone else.
Yes.
And I think it's okay to go and do a pop-up, which is great because you're building brand value, you're
Yep.
building the community. But if you're locked in for a 10-year rental in a building and you need a minimum occupancy of 70% to make the economics work, and you don't hit 70% occupancy, ultimately you'll be losing money for 10 years, which if you have the money to lose, is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I would say most people don't have the money, and that's just one building. Now, if you want to do 30 of those buildings, so that whole structure has to be done in a tried and tested manner, which real estate is the oldest tried and tested sort of asset class. So there's no real like magic, I would say, to real estate.
But I mean, it's a really interesting journey you've been from, like, going from 4 to 30 sites, because there's a lot of people here that are at these first sites and are making plans to sort of like blitz scale out across some other sites, right? And yeah, you've been there, like you've seen how that literally works. So just tell us a little bit more about the details of that. Like, again, so you mentioned site selection was maybe not, you were going to these sort of like more frontier places. Like, did you very rapidly scale the team alongside you from who you'd had pre and post Draper? Like, were you, again, going and acquiring all of these sites? Like, what were the scale of each of these sites that you were occupying? Just, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the logistics of it.
Yeah, so in the stages of the journey, if you're very early, which I think a lot of the companies that I'm meeting are sort of like in the early stage where they're kind of experimenting. They're like, let's go and like experiment, let's do pop-ups, which is great. I think so that the mentality in that stage is different to what kind of real estate you want to do. And then if you get past that, then so all the different stages have different I think requirements. Though I would say my lessons from going through all of these stages is that ultimately you you can blitz scale, but you have to get your first 2 or 3 models really, really well. And this is not a secret. I mean, all the restaurant chains, all the hotel chains. I mean,
Yep.
hotels are a very interesting model to look at because a Marriott is a very asset light model, and they're able to scale across the world. And so I think there are models that you can scale, but I think you have to really understand what kind of business you're in. So for instance, I think the mistake I made was, am I a real estate company? Am I a hospitality company? Or am I a startup community? Or am I a venture capitalist?
Interesting.
Because these are 4 different businesses. And I think with what I'm seeing in the network state sort of landscape is that I'm not sure people really know what business they're in. Um, because if you're in the business of creating new societies, that's a very different business model than saying I'm in the real estate business or I'm in the hospitality business. Because in the hospitality business, it's 90% operations. It's getting your elevators right, it's getting your bathrooms clean, it's about making sure the air conditions work, the unit economics work. That's a very different business than saying, I'm going to create a community of awesome people working together and innovating in, ideas. That's a very different business. And the problem that I had was those who are good at this thing are not good at this thing
Mm-hmm.
because they're two completely different skill sets. And those who are very good at real estate have no interest in the other stuff. And those who are very interested in, building pop-up cities and startup societies have no interest in the real estate stuff. These are two different businesses. Now, you have to find people who know where they stand. And not everyone is good at everything, but there are some people who are good at both. I mean, there are people who are actually good at the real estate, but there are very few of those people. And when I was able to identify people who are very good at managing, occupancy, and also very good at building startup communities,
Yep.
those people are gold, and they're very, very few of those people. So for us, yeah, at one point we had 80 employees around the world, and we moved really, really fast.
No, dude, I have like 1,000 questions on this. I mean, to your point here about these very different businesses or different skill sets or different problems, right? There is sort of a challenge, right? That again, if you're in the business of building like new cities, new states from greenfield sites at scratch, that there just is this plethora of things that you need to be good at to actually sort of like succeed, right? And okay, maybe you can isolate it to these two things and these people are these rare gems. Do you have a list of names that we should all be hiring, or?
I do. Yeah, and by the way, I think what's happening in this sort of movement is very exciting, and there are people who are very good at operations, who are very good at real estate. You need those people. They may not know how to do a fireside chat with a startup founder, but they can run your operations, and
Yeah.
I think you need both of those people. But it has to be clear which business you're in, and they need to know which side of the equation they're in.
Yeah. They're very interesting. But okay, so how long did you go from how long did it take you to go from 4 sites to 30 sites? So how long was this period of time?
We did that in 3 years.
Yeah, okay. So that's like you're basically opening something like every couple of months or something, right?
We were opening things almost every month, and but we're doing it in different models. We were doing joint ventures, we were doing partnerships, we were doing ownership, we were doing pop-ups, we were doing managements, we were doing. So these 30 sites were not all in one model. There were all sorts of different models. And after all of that, my realization was, if you don't own the real estate, don't go in there and put in $10 million to put plants and couches, because 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 someone's got to pay for that. And if you don't have the money to pay for it, it means you're going to have to go raise money to pay for it, which means you're going to have to return that money plus some.
Yep.
And so this is why I think what Dave was saying is like the full stack is a very interesting model, where it's like ownership of the hardware and ownership of the software, which is the people and the innovation. That combination, I think, can be a very, very interesting combination.
It super is. Okay, so I guess the point is you were trying these different models, and the lesson was that like the ones that worked best was where you were earning the real estate as well, not that you were running a pop-up or that you were sort of like leasing or whatever it was, right? That was sort of like the main lesson from those different models.
The other lesson is you have to own your brand. And so there's like two values for building a society. Well, you've got the hardware value, which is the real estate. So you've got to know the value of that. And if you don't own it, you don't really accrue the value. You're accruing the value for someone else if you don't own it. Then you have the brand value, which is also very important. And so I think the brand value has to be very clear, and you have to accrue brand value. And it's possible that these two things together can become supercharged. It's like 2 plus 1 plus 1 is like 30.
Yep.
And so the brand value, if you have a very strong brand value, you could have a model of like licensing and franchising, which maybe then you don't need to own the real estate, but then you know which business you're in.
Sure.
And so I think the brand value accruing the brand value and building the brand value, and then building the hardware value, which is the real estate value. These were the two learnings and lessons that I was able to sort of take away from experience.
That's why I'm glad you're here, because I just feel like you've actually done a whole bunch of this stuff already that a lot of people are looking at, So when did you start to realize that maybe not all these 30 sites were going to be 30 sites that are going to work? Like, I'm assuming you owned, were you enjoying part of this trajectory? Was this a great time? Were you riding high? Like, how did this all start to sort of change? And when did you realize that?
Yeah, so I realized that maybe halfway through your journey. And when I was starting off, I was just naive and stupid. And I had just gotten all this money.
Yep.
So I was naive, stupid, and had money.
Yep.
And so ultimately, you end up spending money and making stupid mistakes. And, I would say relatively we did okay compared to some other stories.
Sure.
But halfway through, I realized, oh, wow, we just leased a huge building in Lisbon, and it's a 10-year lockup for the rental. And oh no, but there's a pandemic coming. Oh no, what are we going to do, right? And that's when halfway through the journey, I realized that I didn't know what business I was in. I think the business that becomes very alluring is like the business of, oh, I'm in the tech community. And the reality is actually, no, you're in the real estate community. You're in the hospitality community, because that's where your business is. Like, where's the money coming in? And so halfway through, I realized that I was making a lot of mistakes. But by that time, it was very hard to get out of 10-year leases.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of legal challenges, etc. So halfway through, I started backing down from our our strategy. But you can't just do that overnight. It takes years to sort of come back from the growth. So then it took me years to sort of scale back.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at a point where we now have a few startup houses, but they're doing really well, and they are making money, they're profitable. But we had to really, really scale back down.
I mean, congratulations to being able to sort of like do that, I guess, as well, right? To realize, and I know that we took a while to cut the losses on 10-year leases, right? But still to be able to bring that back down to a business that's working, like, that's still a feat.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we launched, I think we were the only startup house that was like doing it as a commercial proposition. But then after that, a few brands launched, like Launchpad. Oh, Launch House launched. A6 and Z, I think, invested $10 million in Launch House, and I mean, they had these villas in Beverly Hills or in Hollywood Hills, and we know those people, and we were doing stuff with them. And they had to shut down like immediately, because the models doesn't work. So there were a lot of other brands like that they tried.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say ultimately it's definitely doable. You just have to do it the right way.
Yeah. So that was the Draper House stuff, right? There's then the Draper Nation stuff that you've also been sort of like running through this period of time, right? So do you talk a little bit about what Draper Nation is on top of this?
Yeah. So Draper Nation is a launch pad where we're building companies in 3 verticals. One we're calling global mobility. The other vertical is called governance models. And the third category we're calling is Bitcoin aligned tools. So we're building in all these 3 verticals. In the global mobility, we have a brand called Zera, which helps people get visas, compliance, taxes easily for different countries on a SaaS model. So that's mobility. Then on the governance models, we are trying to build 2 ideas. One is a company called eTibet, which we're trying to create a digital version of Tibet. It's a people with no land, and they'll never have land. So can you create a digital country for that group of people?
Interesting.
The second project there is an open source operating system for governments. So if you come into Johor, you're checking in visas, all of these, the software behind the infrastructure behind all of these government operations is still very cobalt, old school, And so I think there's an opportunity to create the internet open source protocol, but for governments.
Interesting.
So that's the second. And then on the Bitcoin aligned tools, we have launched a Bitcoin Golden Visa Fund in Portugal, where you can hold your Bitcoins for 7 years and get the golden visa. So that's an legal innovation that we have done, and created the first Bitcoin golden visa fund. So these are the three verticals, but our goal is to build a lot more companies and invest in companies within these three verticals. Now, when we launched, we said, let's build a digital country, and we launched a crypto passport, and a lot of people got the crypto passport. And then the question was like, okay, what do we do with this passport? It's like, okay, then we can go open the lock, and that was not very interesting for us. So then we realized, okay, we've got to like step back and build things that are actually practical for today. And we realized that things like visas and taxes and compliance for moving around the world is a very practical challenge that needs a solution. So we're doing that. And so now our ethos is we want to build infrastructure, the plumbing, and we want to do that through these three verticals.
And each of these, what is this like? It's a venture studio, these approaches so far, or these again, they're just like fully owned and run by you guys at the minute? Like, what's the approach to these?
Yeah, at the moment, we're building half of the projects in-house, and half of the projects are outside projects that we're partnering with. But I think we're probably going to go in the direction of it being sort of a venture studio launch pad. But I personally want to do as much of that in-house as possible.
So I guess like, what's the ideal person? Or it's like you're looking for people that, for potential like kind of CEOs that can come in and run projects that you're already incubating, or you're like just open call for ideas within these verticals to come and speak with you and maybe kind of like build alongside you. What's the ask, I guess? Who are you most interested in speaking to under the nation side?
Yeah, so at the moment, we're looking for people building in these ideas. One is, so this falls under the vertical of governance models, and we think that essentially what a country is, it's an insurance policy. That's all it is. So I'm personally interested in companies who may be building, and if they're not, we want to build in some sort of a universal earned income, which is a type of insurance.
Yep.
And so I haven't really seen any sort of interesting, besides WorldCoin, by the way, which is a very interesting project.
Do you know the Plumia guys?
I actually met some of the Plumia. I think I was talking to you.
Yeah.
But some sort of a universal earned income, which is an insurance, is something that I'm interested in.
I love your explicit expression there, right? Universal earned income, right? They're very interesting. But yeah, keep yelling it.
We can double click on that, because like a universal, just a universal basic income, and there's different schools of thoughts on this, of course. But I personally am more aligned towards the universal earned income, where it has to be a business model of give and take.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's something I'm interested in. The other thing I'm very interested in is some sort of a universal trust score, just like a credit score, like a FICO score or whatnot, but some sort of a trust score for as a governance tool is something that I'm interested in. So these two fall in the governance tools. The some sort of an open source operating system for governments is something that I'm interested in and looking for ideas in. And so the list goes on, but I'm interested in working with people who want to build real tools for today's problems, and not for a vibe problem, not a vibe marketing problem, but a real, I need this service because this is a painful project, painful problem that I have. It is something that I'm personally interested in.
Yeah, I guess that takes it back to the beginning, right? Where things that solve problems, like a random border being drawn between the halves of families or whatever it is, right? Yeah, no, fine. Look, thank you so much for being here and for having this chat. I guess, like, where can people find you? Where can people reach out for you if they do have another idea for a tool that they'd like to co-build with you?
Yeah, please connect with me on Telegram. It's Vik Bharati, Twitter, Vik Bharati. My email is vikram@drapernation.com. Please get in touch with me. We're still very early in this Draper Nation journey, but I feel that the opportunity this is the biggest opportunity set, I think, because governments are the biggest industry. I mean, like that the categories I sort of look at is, it's the biggest industry in the world. It's the biggest monopoly in the world, and it has the lowest customer satisfaction in the world.
Yep.
And so, I mean, the disruption that's going to happen in just purely from basic business model perspective is, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation that's happening.
Yep.
That's going to happen, and they're going to be the biggest companies that ever come up.
Yep.
In the history of humanity are people who working in this space.
Amazing. Look, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of your time.
I ran the first 4 funds, which was about 2,000 companies. Partner and co-founder Christine has run another 2,000 companies or so. 2% of those don't suck, it turns out. About 1 out of every 500 companies, we would get a Canva, a Solana, a GitLab, a Talkdesk, and those could be 500 to 1,000, maybe even 2,000x, and that was not expected. Fair amount of experience in fucking up a lot of things, and some experience in things going correctly. We are terrible people. You should not trust us at all. We don't add any value. We inflate our numbers. We're really not any better at picking winners than most of you are. You all suck too, by the way, but 20 years ago, I was looking at where to buy a private island. You know, wartime CEO, get your fucking ass in gear, like move up your ticket, get out of here. And I was like, yes, sir, you're right. Yes, absolutely. Make sure gravity works, and then start building rocket ships on top of that. But I had nothing.